Hi fellow artists, my name is Lauren. I'm the artist behind Potato Art Studios, and in today's video I'll be demonstrating a guinea pig coloring tutorial with pastel pencils and soft pastels. So if you're interested in seeing how I colored this guinea pig from start to finish, just keep on watching. So this video is actually the second part of a two-part series of this guinea pig, and the first video in the series was covering the basics of preparing your image for drawing. So if you haven't seen that video, I'll leave it linked up in the eye and the description box if you'd like to check that one out first. But this video will just be covering the actual process of coloring the guinea pig. I will link the original picture that I used for the reference for this drawing down below. It is from Fixative and it is a royalty-free image, so you are free to use this image in your own drawing. So if you'd like to follow along, you are free to do so. So I already have the sketch of this guinea pig planned out using the grid method. If you haven't seen my grid method drawing tutorial video, I will also have that linked for you. So with the grid, all I have is the basic outline of the guinea pig sketched out and the general direction of the fur. So it's not a lot of detail because we will be covering most of this sketch with my base layer of color. And to apply that base layer of color, I'm going to be using my Soft Tools blending knife number 1, and that will be the blue handled device you see me hold, and it has a sponge tip applicator. So that sponge tip is going to pick up the pigment from my soft pastel sticks and deposit the pastel onto the piece of paper. And I like to use the soft tools instead of the pastels directly because the soft tools pick up a little bit less of the pastel, so I don't overload the paper too quickly early on in the drawing. So now that the base layer is covered, so you can see maybe only 10% of the paper, we're going to get into some basic sketching. So again, in this stage, we're not drawing really any individual hairs, but all I'm doing is slightly darkening or lightening some of the areas of the guinea pig so that we're getting a feel for the volume of it. Because with the base color done, it looks quite flat, like something is cel shaded like a cartoon. So the next step is to basically add a little bit of shadows and highlights so that we can get a sense of how round and fluffy this guy really is. What I'm doing is basically going region by region. So I'll do a section of black or a section of white, and all I'm doing is getting a color slightly darker and slightly lighter than that area to slowly form the shadows and highlighted areas. So a tip I learned from artists on Instagram is that for areas of really deep value, so like the dark areas of black fur, instead of just using black, what I'm going to do is use some dark purples and dark blues. And what that does is give a sense of richness to the color so that it doesn't look as boring if I were to just use black and dark grays for those areas. So the blue and the purple will add a little extra something to your drawing that most people won't be able to pinpoint right away, but if they looked very, very closely at your drawing, they might be able to identify the purples and blues. But it's a very subtle, sneaky thing you can do to add some subtle color. So I was having some difficulty achieving the darkness that I wanted in the guinea pig's fur on the black areas. So I decided to use a fixative, and I will leave a link to my SpectraFix Fixative Concentrate review in the eye and in the description box. But if you've seen that video, you'll know that I was not happy with the concentrate because it ended up erasing a lot of the details in my bearded dragon portrait. But because we are still only about 20% done with the guinea pig at this stage, I felt that it was acceptable to lose some detail in exchange of the ability to build up darker value. So I weighed the pros and cons of using a fixative, and I decided that it was worth it to use a fixative in order to build additional layers on the dark parts of the guinea pig's coat so that I could achieve the end result that I wanted. So to protect the background, the green of the drawing, I decided to create a very quick and dirty mask out of glassine paper. So all I'm doing is cutting a hole in the center of the glassine sheet after tracing a very quick outline, and this is the area that will be exposed to the pastel fixative. So I'm going to just give it a couple of sprays, enough so that it coats the entire drawing, but not so much that it actually drenches the paper completely wet. And because the fixative is a mix of casein and alcohol, it does dry fairly quickly. And you'll see that after I sprayed the fixative, the white area between the guinea pig's face and body does get a little bit darker, and that is an expected result of the fixative from my testing in my video. So I knew I was going to have to backtrack just a little bit in order to allow me to build up darker values on the black areas. The nice part of this fixative is that it does do what it says it's going to do. It's going to fix the pastel onto the paper, so that does make it a little bit easier for the border between the black and white fur. You're going to have less chance of muddying because your early layer of pastel has essentially been locked down with that fixative. So that is one less concern to deal with. We've talked about using purples and blues and the dark fur, but for the light fur, the white fur, I'm actually using a lot of light grays and browns. And because the only areas that are truly white are the very top of his head, I'm actually not using as much white as you think I would, because the majority of the fur that looks white is actually a light gray. So in order for your white to look white, actually the surrounding areas need to be a slightly darker value. I was debating how much I wanted to dedicate the drawing to the grass detail, because I am fairly comfortable with doing grass, but only with pastel pencils and not with soft pastel sticks. So this step is just me prepping the grass. So I'm just using the blending knife, the Soft Tools #1 blending knife, to apply different shades of green to the background. But for the grass that is immediately surrounding the guinea pig's body, I do want to go through the effort of drawing individual blades of grass. And again, with my approach to fur, each blade of grass does not need to be exactly where it should be, but you should be paying attention to the general direction and general value of the grass. I pulled out my green pastel pencils first for some of the blurrier grass areas in the middle of the paper. But the larger blades of grass that will be well defined around the immediate area of the guinea pig will be done with soft pastel sticks. And for that, I have my Unison Dark Jewel set, which is something I recently picked up last month. And that is, I did show it in a haul that I posted a few weeks ago. And I will be using my Sennelier soft pastels for that. And so for the individual blades of grass, I'm approaching it from the top going down, so the grass will layer on top of the previous layer nicely and more naturally than if you were to work from the bottom up, so that the grass looks like how it would grow from the ground. So I'm going to be working from the top down and also paying attention to what colors I'm picking. So the grass on the upper areas will be a slightly deeper and unsaturated green, and as we move down it will be a lighter and more vibrant green. And I think that it looks quite good for each blade of grass just being one stroke. It is of course simplifying the grass to one color, and if you'd like to be more realistic, you can go in and define the tips and the edges of the grass to be a little bit more realistic. But for me, this was pretty good that I was just playing around with the soft pastels, and I really liked this simplified but direct way of doing grass. And so when I'm coloring with the grass, I'm keeping track of which colors I'm using because I want to make sure that the grass is consistent throughout the whole drawing. So because I'm right-handed, I started from the left-hand side and slowly worked my way over to the right because my hand would be kind of blocking my progress. So depending on if you're right or left-handed, keep that in mind. And if you're having troubles with smearing, always pull out a sheet of paper and you can use that as kind of like a hand guard as you're coloring. And as we're in the final lap of the drawing where we're focusing on those individual hairs, remember that you can always rotate your drawing as needed so that your wrist is going to be in less strain, in a less strenuous position as you're coloring. So I flipped my guinea pig upside down so I could reach certain areas of his body more comfortably. And the last layer of detail, I switched over completely to just using the Faber-Castell Pit pencils because I can sharpen these pencils to a very, very fine tip, and that's really important if you want to get those fine first strokes, so to replicate the effects of individual hair follicles. When we're in the final hour of the drawing, I am stepping back from the picture about every 5 to 10 minutes and re-evaluating what areas need to be slightly adjusted. I usually stand at least 10 to 20 feet away from my painting and look at the drawing next to my computer screen, and anything that pops up that looks very different that I need to tweak, I'll go in and make those adjustments. So I noticed at the very end that there were some areas that actually looked too defined on the guinea pig's body, so I went in with my eyeshadow applicator to basically blur out areas that were actually too detailed and too defined. I believe that wraps up the drawing tutorial. If there is anything that I didn't explain well that you would like clarification on, please leave a comment below and I will do my best to answer them. If you'd like to see more speed drawing tutorials from me, I have an entire playlist that I will link for you in the eye and down below. I will have a complete list of the materials that I use down below in the description box as well. None of the links will be affiliated links. They are just direct sources where I personally buy my art supplies. So as always, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.